What would you do if you came home to find everything destroyed except for the one thing your mother-in-law always wanted? I'm Willow, and after 3 days away on a corporate retreat, I returned to a ransacked house. Furniture overturned, papers scattered, but nothing valuable taken except for my grandmother's letters. The safe was open, the combination known only to a few, and when I found the receipt for a duplicate key, I knew exactly who was behind it. Now, standing in the wreckage of my home, one thing is clear. They wanted a war, and I'm ready to give them one. The first thing I noticed when I opened my front door wasn't the overturned furniture or the scattered papers. It was the silence, a heavy, unnatural quiet that wrapped around me like a burial shroud, whispering that something was terribly wrong. I'm Willow, and I just spent 3 days at a corporate retreat, learning how to trust my colleagues through ridiculous team-building exercises. Now I'm standing in my ransacked living room, realizing I should have been more concerned about trusting my own family. My fingers trembled as I dialed Caleb's number. 1 ring, 2 rings. The familiar click of voicemail, of course. My dear husband was probably at his mother's house, pretending not to know why his wife was calling. Caleb, someone broke into the house. The safe is open. Call me back immediately. I walked through the wreckage of my violated home, taking inventory of the damage. Photo frames turned face down, drawers pulled out and emptied, couch cushions slashed open. But they hadn't been searching for money or jewelry. No, this was personal. They went straight for what mattered most, my grandmother's letters, the only pieces I had left of her. My phone buzzed. Not Caleb. Evan from work. How's the drive back? He asked. Someone broke into my house, my voice cracked. The safe, they knew the combination. Evan, Jesus, are you okay? Do you need me to come over? No. I kicked aside a torn magazine, frustration boiling up inside me. I know exactly who did this. I glanced at the mess around me. Meredith's fingerprints are all over it. She's been after those letters for months. Your mother-in-law? Why would she? Because she can't stand that Caleb married someone who won't bow to her every whim. My voice was low and tight. I moved through the kitchen where even the cabinets had been emptied. She thinks those letters prove my grandmother's family wronged hers decades ago, some ancient real estate dispute she refuses to let go of. Call the police, Evan urged, and tell them what? I laughed bitterly. That my mother-in-law used a key my husband probably gave her to steal family documents? That my sister-in-law probably helped because she's bitter about her divorce and wants to ruin someone else's marriage? I shook my head. They're too smart for that. They'll say Caleb gave them permission. It'll be my word against the entire Miller family. The basement door stood ajar. I hadn't checked down there yet. I have to go, Evan. I need to see what else they took. Willow, wait. I hung up and descended the stairs, each step creaking under my feet. The basement light flickered on, revealing more chaos, but something caught my eye. A small piece of paper trapped under a fallen box. I reached for it and pulled it free. It was a receipt from a hardware store dated 3 days ago for a duplicate key. My phone buzzed again. Caleb. Where are you? I asked before he could speak. At Mom's. Listen, Willow, I can explain. Did you give her a key? Silence. Then she said she just wanted to look for some old family photos while you were away. I didn't think. You never do think when it comes to her, do you? I crushed the receipt in my fist. Those letters were all I had left of my grandmother, Caleb, the only things that were truly mine. We can talk about this when I get home. No! My voice was sharp, cutting through the air. We'll talk about this in front of everyone. I'm coming over there right now, and Caleb, tell your mother to prepare for war. I ended the call standing in my destroyed basement, surrounded by the wreckage of trust. They thought they could break me, make me submit to their control like everyone else in their lives, but they had no idea what they just started. Sometimes, the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who strikes first. It's the one who knows to strike back harder. Meredith's pristine living room made my skin crawl. Everything perfectly arranged, not a cushion out of place, while my house lay in ruins across town. The family photos on her walls told their own story. Caleb and Sierra's childhood moments carefully curated to show Meredith's version of reality. Not a single picture of my wedding day among them. I have no idea what you're talking about. Meredith's voice dripped honey-sweet poison as she poured tea into delicate cups. Caleb gave me permission to look for old family albums while you were away. Nothing more. Chloe sat beside her mother, arms crossed, wedding ring conspicuously absent. You're being hysterical, Willow, as usual. I placed the hardware store receipt on the coffee table. Funny how you needed a new key made 3 days ago, planning ahead. Caleb shifted in his seat, eyes darting between his mother and me. Maybe we should all calm down. Oh, we're very calm, I said, watching Meredith's perfectly manicured fingers tighten around her teacup. Just like we were calm last Christmas when you went through my phone while I was sleeping, or last month when you showed up unannounced at my office to check on me. I worry about my son, Meredith said. Someone needs to look out for his interests. His interests? My laugh felt like broken glass in my throat. Or yours, Mother. She was right about you from the start. Chloe leaned forward, eyes gleaming. You never understood our family. Always keeping secrets, hiding things in that safe of yours. Those letters belong to my grandmother. Letters that prove your family cheated ours 60 years ago. Meredith's mask cracked. That property should have been ours. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing when she... Mother! Caleb's warning came too late. I stood slowly, pieces clicking into place. So you admit you took them? Meredith's face smoothed over instantly. I admitted nothing, and you have no proof. You're right. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the record button. But I will. Caleb, are you coming home or staying here? He looked at his mother, then at me. Always torn, always choosing the path of least resistance. I think maybe we all need space to cool off. Wrong answer. I headed for the door, pausing to look back at Meredith. You know what's funny? Those letters you stole, they're not even the originals. Just copies I kept as decoys. Grandmother taught me well. Always keep what matters most where manipulative people can't reach it. Meredith's teacup clattered against its saucer. You're lying. Am I? Guess you'll have to wonder about that, along with what else I might have hidden away. I met Caleb's eyes. Don't bother coming home tonight. Or maybe ever. Willow, wait. He started to rise, but Chloe grabbed his arm. Let her go, she said. She's just trying to manipulate you, like always. I closed the door on Meredith's perfectly ordered world and walked to my car. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, but not from fear. The originals were safe, just as I'd said, locked away in a safety deposit box since the day I married Caleb, and saw the hunger in Meredith's eyes when Grandma's letters were mentioned at the wedding. My phone buzzed. Evan again. How bad was it? He asked. They took the bait. Meredith practically confessed. I started the engine. But I need your help with something else. Remember that security system you installed at your lake house, the one with the hidden cameras? Yeah? Why? Because I'm done playing defense. They want to go through my things? Let's make sure we catch them in the act next time. I pulled away from Meredith's house, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror. And Evan, thank you for being the one person in my life who actually listens. Always. But Willow, just be careful. People like that, they're most dangerous when they're cornered. I ended the call, mind already racing with plans. Meredith thought she knew everything about me, had me all figured out. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd spent 3 years watching her manipulate everyone around her. I'd learned from the best, and now it was time to put those lessons to use. The coffee shop across from Meredith's favorite salon wasn't my usual spot, but it gave me the perfect vantage point. I'd been watching for 2 hours when Evan slid into the seat across from me, sliding a fresh cup of coffee toward my hands. The cameras are set up, he said, his voice steady. Motion sensors, night vision, everything feeding directly to your phone. But are you sure about this? I nodded toward the salon's window where Meredith and Sierra sat, getting their weekly manicures. Listen. I pressed play on my phone, the recording clear through the bug I'd planted in Meredith's purse during our confrontation. We need those original letters, Meredith was saying, her voice low but unmistakable. That safety deposit box has to be at her bank downtown. Caleb says she's been going through their financial records. Probably planning to divorce him and take everything, Sierra replied. Over my dead body. I didn't spend 30 years building this family's reputation to have her destroy it. We're going back to the house tomorrow while she's at work. There has to be something we can use against her. I stopped the recording. Still think I'm paranoid? I asked, watching Evan's face harden. We should take this to the police. And tell them what? I shook my head. That my mother-in-law is planning to rob me? They'll just say it's a family matter. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. Besides, I want more than just stopping them. I want them to face consequences for once in their privileged lives. My phone buzzed. Caleb calling again. Third time today. I declined it without hesitation. He's been sleeping at their house, I said, bitterness coating my words. Probably plotting with them, trying to figure out where the originals are, or maybe he's worried about you. Then he should have worried before giving them a key to our house, I muttered, the coffee turning bitter in my mouth. Before choosing them over me again. A text from Caleb. Please come home. We need to talk. Home? I said, my voice thick with frustration. Like that means anything anymore. Evan leaned forward, his gaze softer now. Willow, I know you're hurt, but... The salon door chimed, cutting him off. Meredith and Chloe emerged, their fresh manicures gleaming in the sunlight. They headed toward Meredith's Mercedes, but Meredith paused, looking directly at the coffee shop window. I didn't move, couldn't breathe. Her lips curved into a knowing smile. She knew I was watching. Time to go, I said, standing abruptly, gathering my things. They'll be at my house tomorrow at 10, according to their usual schedule. That's when we catch them. We? Evan raised an eyebrow. I thought you wanted to handle this yourself. I did. I do. But my hands shook slightly as I gathered my things. I can't face them alone anymore. I need someone in my corner. Always. He touched my arm gently. Just promise me something. Don't let revenge consume you. I've seen what it does to people. I watched Meredith's car pull away, remembering the day she'd first shown her true colors our wedding reception, when she'd cornered me in the bathroom. You'll never be good enough for this family, she'd said. One day Caleb will realize that. This isn't about revenge, I told Evan, my voice firm. It's about justice, and maybe saving Caleb from them even if he doesn't want to be saved. My phone buzzed again. Another text from an unknown number. I opened it, and my blood froze. Found something interesting in your grandmother's old law firm records. Tomorrow noon, Riverside Park. Come alone or Caleb learns everything about the Anderson case. Evan noticed the change in my expression. What's wrong? I closed the message, my mind racing. The Anderson case, my grandmother's biggest regret. The secret she'd taken to her grave. The real reason Meredith hated our family. Nothing, I lied, forcing a smile. Just work stuff. I should go prepare for tomorrow. But as I walked to my car, Meredith's words from 3 years ago echoed in my head. One day Caleb will realize that. Maybe she was right. Maybe tomorrow he would. And maybe it was time he did. Riverside Park looked different at noon, colder somehow. I sat on a bench clutching a manila envelope, ammunition for whatever game Meredith was playing. The Anderson case files my grandmother had sealed away decades ago, now a weapon in my hands. A shadow fell across my lap. Not Meredith. Caleb. My voice cracked. What are you? Mother told me everything. He sat beside me, leaving careful space between us. About the Anderson case, about what your grandmother did to our family. The envelope felt heavier. Did she tell you how your grandfather tried to blackmail mine? How he threatened to destroy their law firm unless they gave him that property? That's not... He stopped, rubbing his face. She said you'd try to twist things like she twisted you. I turned to face him. When did you give her the safe combination, Caleb? His silence was answer enough. The day after our wedding, I continued. When she convinced you I was hiding something. That's why you've been checking our bank statements, right? Looking for evidence I'm stealing from you? I was protecting our family. Our family? The laugh that escaped me didn't sound like my voice. There is no our family. There's only ever been yours. My phone buzzed. Evan texting about the cameras he'd installed. Everything was ready for tomorrow's trap, but suddenly it all felt hollow. She's using you, I said softly. She always has, and you let her because it's easier than standing up to her. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I stood, dropping the envelope in his lap. Here, the precious Anderson case files. Proof that your grandfather was the one who committed fraud, not mine. Proof that your mother's been lying all these years. He stared at the envelope. How did you get them? From my grandmother's old partner. Turns out he's been waiting years for someone to finally expose the truth. I stepped back. But you know what? Keep them. Burn them. Give them to Meredith. I don't care anymore. Willow, wait. I filed for divorce yesterday. The words hung between us like shattered glass. Caleb's face went pale. You what? Check your email. The papers should arrive today. My hands were steady now. I'm done being the villain in Meredith's story, done watching you choose them over me, done pretending we have a marriage worth saving. He stood reaching for me. We can fix this. I'll talk to Mother. That's exactly the problem. I moved away from his touch. Your first instinct is still to run to her. It always will be. My phone buzzed. Evan texting about the cameras, now useless. She's using you, I said softly. She always has, and you let her because it's easier than standing up to her. You don't understand? I understand perfectly. I stood, dropping the envelope in his lap. Here, the precious Anderson case files. Proof that your grandfather was the one who committed fraud, not mine. Proof your mother has been lying all these years. He stared at the envelope. How did you get them? From my grandmother's old partner. Turns out he's been waiting years for someone to finally expose the truth. I stepped back. But you know what? Keep them. Burn them. Give them to Meredith. I don't care anymore. Willow, wait. I filed for divorce yesterday. The words hung between us like shattered glass. Caleb's face went pale. You what? Check your email. The papers should arrive today. My hands were steady now. I'm done being the villain in Meredith's story, done watching you choose them over me, done pretending we have a marriage worth saving. He stood reaching for me. We can fix this. I'll talk to Mother. That's exactly the problem. I moved away from his touch. Your first instinct is still to run to her. It always will be. My phone buzzed. Meredith this time. Where are you? We had a deal. I typed back. Deals changed. Ask Caleb about the files. You can't just throw away 3 years of marriage, Caleb said. You already did that when you gave them the key to our house. I started walking away, then paused. You know what the saddest part is? I actually thought I could save you from them, but you don't want to be saved. Willow, goodbye. I walked through the park, past the spot where he proposed, past the bench where we used to have Sunday picnics. My phone kept buzzing. Meredith, Caleb, even Chloe. I silenced them all. Only Evan's message got through. Cameras are live. You still want to go through with tomorrow's plan? I stopped at the park exit, looking back one last time. Caleb stood exactly where I had left him. the envelope clutched tightly in his hands, looking utterly lost. For a brief moment, my resolve wavered. Then I remembered everything: the ransacked house, the violated safe, 3 years of subtle manipulation and gaslighting. "Yes," I texted back, my fingers trembling. "But change of plans. I don't just want to catch them in the act anymore." "What do you want?" Caleb's phone lit up in his hands, probably calling Meredith, always running back to her, always choosing her over me. "I want to destroy them," I typed, my thumb pressing harder against the screen. "All of them. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn everything to the ground and start over." I looked down at the security camera feed flickering on my laptop screen, my heart thumping against my chest. 10 minutes until Meredith's usual Thursday morning intrusion. Evan's sophisticated setup captured every angle of my house: the front door, the back, even the garden path Meredith had always loved to criticize. "You don't have to watch this," Evan said from the passenger seat, his voice laced with concern. "We can just let the cameras record." "I need to see it," I replied, my grip tightening around my coffee cup. "I need to know exactly how they do it." Right on schedule, Meredith's Mercedes glided to a stop in front of my house. She stepped out first, as perfectly coiffed as ever, followed by Chloe. But then, the third door opened. "Caleb!" The coffee cup crumpled in my hand, the heat burning my palm as I stared at the screen in disbelief. "He's helping them." My voice was barely above a whisper, the betrayal settling like lead in my chest. They approached the front door, Caleb glancing nervously over his shoulder. Meredith said something, gesturing impatiently. He pulled out a key, not a copy, but his original. "Jesus," Evan muttered, his eyes wide. "Willow, maybe we should wait." I grabbed his arm, eyes fixed on the screen as a fourth figure emerged from Meredith's car. A man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. "That's James Morton," Evan said, his voice quieter now. "Meredith's lawyer. I've seen him at charity events." The group disappeared inside my house. I switched between camera views, watching them move through rooms with a disturbing familiarity. Meredith directed them with the precision of a general commanding troops. "The study," she said, her voice clear through the hidden microphones. "Those Anderson files have to be here somewhere." "Mother, she said she gave them to me," Caleb protested, his voice strained. "Weekly copies, obviously." "You think your wife would give up her only leverage? Search everything." I watched them tear through my home again, but this time, everything felt different. I saw Caleb's hands shaking as he opened drawers, Chloe's smirk of satisfaction as she knocked books off shelves, and Meredith's mask slipped when she thought no one was watching, revealing raw desperation beneath. "The safe," Morton said suddenly, his voice cold. "Did you check behind it?" My breath caught in my throat. The wall safe had been a decoy, everyone knew it. But behind it, there was something much more dangerous. "Back there?" Caleb said, his voice too quick, too panicked. Meredith's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Move it, Mother. Move it." I grabbed my phone, fingers hovering over the 911 button, my pulse pounding in my ears. Behind that safe was a hidden compartment installed by the previous owner, one I had never told anyone about. Inside were documents far more damaging than anything to do with the Anderson case, evidence of Meredith's own financial misconduct, carefully gathered over 3 years of watching and waiting. Caleb stepped forward, then stopped abruptly. "No," he said, his voice steady for the first time in this whole ordeal. "This ends now. We're leaving." Meredith turned on him, her face twisting with rage. "What did you say?" "I said no," Caleb repeated, his tone stronger. "This ends now. We're leaving. After everything I've done for you." Meredith's calm cracked. "That woman has poisoned you against your own family. That woman is my wife." "Not anymore," Morton interrupted smoothly. "The divorce papers were filed yesterday. You have no legal right to." I stepped into the doorway, phone recording everything. Breaking and entering. Destruction of property conspiracy. They froze like guilty children, except Meredith. She smiled that knowing smile. Perfect timing, dear. We were just discussing the Anderson case and other family matters. I can see that. I moved further into the room, Evan close behind. But you made one mistake, Meredith. You got sloppy. Desperate? I don't know what you mean. The Anderson case was never about property fraud, was it? It was about covering up what really happened. What you did. Her smile slipped. You're confused. The real documents aren't behind that safe. They're already with the district attorney. I met Caleb's stunned gaze along with proof that your mother embezzled millions from her own charity foundation. That's why she's so desperate to find evidence against my family, to protect herself. The room erupted in chaos. Meredith lunged for her lawyer, Chloe started screaming, Caleb stood frozen between them all. But I kept my eyes on Meredith, watching her perfect world crumble. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone. Sometimes it's about letting them destroy themselves, and sometimes justice comes from simply telling the truth. The police lights painted my living room in alternating red and blue. Sat primly on the couch, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face as she spoke to the officers. I was just trying to protect my son, she sobbed, from her. She pointed at me, and I watched 3 years of careful planning crumble. Mrs. Miller was threatening our family, Morton added smoothly. We have evidence of her harassment, her obsession with destroying her mother-in-law's reputation. The break-in was merely an attempt to recover documents that rightfully belonged to the family. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, the recording of their intrusion now useless. They got ahead of me, turned it all around, just like Meredith always did. That's not true, Caleb said suddenly. All eyes turned to him. Mother, stop, just stop. Meredith's tears vanished instantly. Caleb, dear, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. He stepped away from her toward me, but I backed away. Too little, too late. The embezzlement accusations, they're true, aren't they? That's why you've been so desperate to destroy Willow's family's reputation, to cover your tracks. Everything I did was for this family. Meredith's mask shattered completely. That money secured your future, your sister's future, and she jabbed a finger at me. Threatened to ruin everything. The officers exchanged glances. One spoke into his radio. Mrs. Meredith Miller, we're going to need you to come down to the station. This is absurd. I'm the victim here. She turned to her lawyer. Morton, do something. But Morton was already edging toward the door. I think our professional relationship has concluded, Meredith, given the circumstances. Everything happened quickly after that. Meredith screaming as they led her away, Chloe following, wailing about family loyalty, Morton slipping out during the chaos, the evidence I'd gathered being collected, documented, tagged. Caleb stayed. Willow, he started. Don't. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. I didn't know about the charity money, about any of it, I swear. But you knew about the break-ins, the harassment, the lies? My voice cracked. You chose them. Every single time you chose them. I can fix this. Fix what? I gestured at our destroyed home. My grandmother's letters are still gone. Our marriage is over. Your mother's going to jail. What exactly can you fix? Evan appeared in the doorway. Willow, the detective needs your statement. I moved to follow him, but Caleb caught my arm. I love you, he said desperately. Isn't that worth something? I looked at his hand on my arm, remembering every touch, every promise, every moment I'd thought we were building something real. Then I remembered watching him help them break into our home, watching him choose his mother's lies over my truth one last time. Love without trust isn't love, I said quietly. It's just another form of control. I pulled away, leaving him standing in the wreckage of our life together. The detective waited with more questions, more forms, more procedures. Hours of explaining how I'd gathered evidence of Meredith's embezzlement, how I documented her harassment, how I'd watched my marriage die slowly under the weight of manipulation and lies. Later, alone in my car, I pulled out my grandmother's last letter, the real one, not the copy Meredith had stolen, the one I'd kept close all these years. "Remember, dear heart," she'd written, "sometimes winning means walking away. Sometimes the greatest victory is in refusing to play their game at all." My phone buzzed. Caleb again. I declined the call and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the doorway of what used to be our home, looking lost. For a moment, my heart ached, but as I drove away, I realized something. In trying to destroy Meredith, I'd almost become her manipulative, obsessed with control, willing to sacrifice anything for victory. My grandmother had been right. The real win wasn't in bringing Meredith down. It was in finally setting myself free. The courthouse hallway stretched endless and cold. I sat on a hard wooden bench, watching Meredith's society friends whisper among themselves as they waited for her arraignment. 3 weeks since the break-in, and still they couldn't quite believe their charitable board president was facing embezzlement charges. Caleb appeared at the end of the hall, dark circles under his eyes. Sierra clung to his arm, shooting daggers at me with her eyes. I focused on my phone, pretending to read emails. "Willow," his voice was closer than I expected. "Can we talk?" "The divorce papers are with your lawyer," I said without looking up. "Just sign them." "That's not—" He sat beside me, too close. "Mother wants to make a deal now." I looked at him. "A deal?" "She'll return your grandmother's letters, all of them, if you drop the charges." A laugh bubbled up, bitter as coffee. "Grass, you really don't get it, do you? She's still my mother, and that's all that matters, right?" I stood, needing distance. Even after everything she did, everything she stole. She made mistakes. My voice carried, making heads turn. She systematically destroyed our marriage, terrorized me in my own home, stole millions from her own charity. Those aren't mistakes, Caleb. They're choices. Meredith's loyal appeared, beckoning to Caleb, but before he could move, the courthouse doors burst open. Evan rushed in, clutching a manila envelope. "Got it," he said, breathing hard. "Found it in Morton's office." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single document, a letter from Meredith to her lawyer dated 3 years ago, the day before my wedding. "What is that?" Caleb asked. "Insurance," I said, scanning the contents. "In case I ever threatened her control over you." I looked up as Meredith entered in handcuffs, flanked by officers. She planned this from the beginning. The harassment, the break-ins, everything. It was all calculated to make me look unstable, obsessed with the Anderson case. Meredith's eyes locked onto the letter for the first time. I saw real fear there. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. "Your lawyer isn't as loyal as you thought." I held up the letter. "You documented everything, Meredith. Every step of your plan to destroy me, and now everyone's going to know exactly who you are. You ungrateful little—" She lunged forward, but the officers held her back. "Mother, stop!" Caleb moved between us. "Just stop!" Meredith's face crumpled. "Everything I did was for you, to protect you from her," she sobbed. "From what?" Caleb's voice cracked. "From being happy? From having a life outside your control? She never loved you like I do." "No," I interrupted. "I loved him enough to let him choose. You loved him enough to make sure he never could." The whispers around us grew louder. Meredith's friends watched in horror as their perfect society matron shattered before their eyes. Sierra backed away from her mother, finally seeing the truth she'd helped enable. "The arraignment's starting," Evan said softly. I handed the letter to the district attorney, who'd been waiting quietly nearby. Then I turned to Caleb one last time. "I did love you," I said, "but love shouldn't hurt like this. Willow, please." "Goodbye, Caleb." I walked away as Meredith was led into the courtroom, her carefully constructed world collapsing behind me. My phone buzzed, a text from my grandmother's old law partner. "Found something in the archives," it read. "Your grandmother would be proud." Outside, the autumn air felt clean and sharp. Evan caught up with me at the bottom of the courthouse steps. "You okay?" he asked. I watched leaves scatter across the pavement, breaking free from their branches, carried away by the wind. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be. Because sometimes winning isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about refusing to let them destroy you. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply walking away, head held high, leaving them to face the consequences of their own choices." The last box from my old life sat unopened on the floor of my new apartment. Through the window, downtown lights glittered like scattered stars, a stark contrast to the suburban darkness I had left behind. My phone buzzed Evan's text about Meredith's sentencing, 5 years for embezzlement. The society pages were already buzzing with scandal, her carefully crafted reputation shattered like a dropped teacup. A knock at the door froze me. I recognized that pattern. 3 quick taps, 1 slow. Caleb stood in the hallway, holding a familiar leather-bound bundle. "Grandmother's letters," I said, my throat tight. "Found them in Mother's study while cleaning out the house." He held them out, like a peace offering. "They were always yours." I took the bundle, my fingers brushing the worn edges. "How is she?" "Angry. Bitter." He shrugged, his tone casual, but there was something deeper in his eyes. "She's in therapy. Says she's starting to understand some things about our family." "And you?" "Learning to stand on my own." He glanced past me into the apartment. "You're painting." The easel by the window caught his attention, the canvas half covered in bold strokes of red and gold. Something I discovered by accident, a way to pour out everything words couldn't express. "It helps," I said, my voice quiet, almost contemplative. "Willow, I don't—" He hesitated, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Inside were the signed divorce papers and something else. "You should see." I opened it, finding a yellowed newspaper clipping from 30 years ago. It was a small article about Meredith Miller, a young woman trying desperately to prove herself worthy of high society before she married into money. "She was always afraid," Caleb said softly, his voice tinged with understanding. "Afraid of losing control, of being exposed as not good enough. I'm not excusing what she did, but I understand it now." "Understanding doesn't make it right," I replied, my words firm but soft. "No," he agreed, his voice steady. "But it helps me not become her." A siren wailed somewhere in the city below. In my old life, I would have flinched at the sound. But now, it felt like a reminder life goes on, changes, transforms. "I never wanted revenge," I said, surprising myself with the truth. "I just wanted to be free." "I know," Caleb replied quietly. "That's why you won." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "The painting, it's beautiful." After he left, I opened the bundle of letters, letting my grandmother's words flow across the pages. She told stories of strength, of standing up to bullies, of choosing integrity over revenge. But one passage caught my eye, written just before she died. "Remember, dear heart, some people will try to dim your light because they fear their own darkness. Your power lies not in fighting them, but in continuing to shine." I picked up my brush, adding soft touches of blue to the canvas. Not everything needed resolution. Not every story required a neat ending. Sometimes victory wasn't about destroying your enemies, or even forgiving them. Sometimes it was about discovering who you were without them. My phone buzzed again. Evan was inviting me to dinner, not a date, not yet, but maybe someday. For now, friendship was enough. For now, I had my freedom, my truth, my art. The city lights flickered outside, casting shadows that danced across my canvas. In my old life, I would have seen threats in those shadows, but now I saw possibilities, patterns, stories waiting to be told. I picked up another brush. The night was young. The canvas was waiting. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free, not because I had won, or because Meredith had lost, but because I had finally learned the difference between revenge and liberation. And in that difference, I found myself. They thought I would break, that I would swallow my pride and accept the betrayal. But what they didn't expect was that when someone is pushed to their limits, they don't just stand up, they strike back. Betrayal isn't just a wound. It's a fire that burns through everything you once believed in. But does revenge truly bring relief? Or does it pull you into the same darkness as those who hurt you? Willow wasn't just betrayed by her husband, she was manipulated, controlled, and robbed by an entire family. She had two choices: walk away and rebuild, or face them head-on and expose the truth. But that raises the question, is truth always justice, or is revenge sometimes the only way to balance the scales? Willow didn't act out of rage. Every move she made was calculated, a strategy to turn the game against them. This wasn't just about a woman wronged, it was about reclaiming power. Meredith represents the manipulators of the world, those who believe they can control everyone around them until the truth forces them to face their own destruction. And Caleb? Was he just another victim of his mother's influence? Or was he a coward who chose comfort over doing what was right? Betrayal, in its cruel way, often becomes a gift. It forces us to see who truly stands beside us. Willow learned the hard way that love shouldn't require blind sacrifice, and family isn't always defined by blood. But she also faces a harsh reality. Was winning worth it if it made her just like them? So now, the real question is, what would you have done in her place? Should she have stopped before everything spiraled out of control? Or was she right to expose them and make them face the consequences? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what you think.
A family that runs a major restaurant group was my husband's family. To my mother-in-law, who had a husband designated as the next head of the family, that status shined brighter than anything. I, raised by a single father, seemed to be nothing but a stain on their family. To her, a daughter-in-law whose family and status was below her husband and her own, was an insignificant creature deserving to be ignored. However, the situation changed drastically when my design was chosen for the menu of the restaurant managed by my father-in-law. My mother-in-law had studied design a bit, but was eliminated in the first round of the selection process. "It's just a lousy thing you scribbled," she would say in sour grapes, but to hold such a thing against the work of a professional designer and to harbor resentment after that was petty. Her behavior towards me, the woman raised by one parent, shifted from ignoring me to outright mistreatment. She would come to our separate house where my husband Wyatt and I lived to spout sarcasm and nag. "Zoe, dear, the dust behind the TV hasn't been cleaned at all. What kind of upbringing leads to satisfaction with such cleaning?" she criticized. My mother-in-law would start finding fault as soon as she arrived, loudly pointing things out. "That was actually me," my husband would reply, clearly disheartened. Since my husband was working from home and was naturally helpful with housework, the chores had inadvertently become his burden. It was a complete boomerang back to my mother-in-law, questioning what kind of upbringing she gave. "Zoe, dear, are you pushing housework onto your husband again? What kind of wife does that? Neglecting chores because you prioritize work," she would say, shifting the blame to me. Even if my husband tried to stop her, my mother-in-law wouldn't quit until I apologized. "I'm really sorry, I'll try harder," I would say, bowing. My mother-in-law would leave our place with a smug grin, satisfied. My husband always sighed at his mother's attitude. "I'm sorry, I'll take on more of the chores," he said. "No, it's clearly Mom's sarcasm. I'm sorry for not being more supportive," he continued, always defending me. But his mother never took his words to heart. He had talked to his father about it, but the lack of any change in her behavior suggested that his father, busy with managing the business, probably forgot to follow up. "Well, I just have to put up with my mother-in-law's ill-natured sarcasm and so on," I thought. As people aged, I believed they would become more easygoing, but I never imagined she would pull something like this. My husband's cousin got engaged, and a celebration was set up. Apparently they were inviting people from work, not just family, and they had rented out a hall in a fancy hotel that could accommodate 70 people for a grand celebration. The day after my husband informed me, I received a call from my mother-in-law. The celebration is a traditional event, so we'll leave some of the dishes to the venue, but family members will prepare the main dishes. We're assigning tasks for each type of dish, and I have a proposal. Zoe, you used to brag about being good at cooking, right? She asked. Her tone was sarcastic, but I did remember saying once that I was good at cooking because I used to help my dad since I was little. If it turns out bad, you'll be the one embarrassed later, but that's fine. Please take care of the Japanese cuisine, she concluded. Before I could respond, she had already made up her mind and ended the call. Well, that's typical, I thought, and began adjusting my work schedule for the day of the event, and started selecting the Japanese cuisine menu. Everything went smoothly until the day of the celebration. In hindsight, it was just the calm before the storm. On the day of the engagement party, my mother-in-law called me on my cell phone. It was 11:30 a.m. The event was supposed to start at 1 p.m., so as the main coordinator, my mother-in-law had to be busy with the final venue check, right? Feeling puzzled, I answered the phone. Oh, Zoe dear, I checked the dishes you prepared, the mother-in-law began. Such terrible cooking. Please discard it. I was so shocked I threw it all away. Caught off guard by her high-pitched chatter, I couldn't grasp the situation and gave a half-hearted reply. I'm sorry. I'm at the office right now. I'm in the middle of work. I was rushing through an urgent job so I could make it to the celebration on time. You're so shocked you can't even speak. There's no time. It starts at 1. Hurry up and remake it, she insisted. I was at a loss. We were not on the same page. Could it be that she didn't know I had swapped my duty for today? As I started to realize what might be happening, a dreadful thought came to mind. Calm down me. What did my mother-in-law just say? She threw away the dishes. In fact, a few days after I was assigned to the Japanese cuisine, I had to swap tasks with someone in charge of sending out invitations due to unforeseen circumstances. I hadn't been concerned about contacting my mother-in-law, the event coordinator, because the lady I swapped tasks with said she would call my mother-in-law. Gathering my thoughts, I replied, Listen carefully, mother-in-law. I'm at the office right now. I have been all morning. I was removed from cooking duty, so I was catching up on work during the freed-up time. I explained slowly. Then whose cooking is this? She mumbled. Then I heard her gasp sharply. What are we going to do? There's only an hour left until the start. This is your responsibility. You didn't report the change. That's it. You'll take care of it. Otherwise, I'll say you threw it away. She spoke quickly. My mother-in-law was panicking so much she was spouting nonsense, but I didn't want her going around saying I had tossed the food. Reluctantly, I apologized and excused myself from the office and rushed to the venue. I just missed the train and arrived a little past noon. I had explained the situation to my husband via text, so as soon as he saw me, he rushed over. He was looking pale. I'm too late. The food was in the green room, but there was an uproar because the Japanese cuisine was missing. When I went to the kitchen, the sink was clogged with food, he said excitedly. It felt like a crime scene with a tense atmosphere. Zoe threw it away. Her absence is proof enough. My mother-in-law blamed me, as my husband told me. I was holding back a headache. I need to get to the scene, I told my husband, and at the same time, I entrusted him with a request. As soon as I arrived in the kitchen, my sharp-eyed mother-in-law spotted me. What have you done? She yelled. My husband's aunts, his cousin, the one engaged, and the fiancée Savannah, along with other relatives who heard the commotion, were there. They all turned their accusing eyes on me, but I calmly objected. I did not throw away the food. Don't play dumb, my mother-in-law shrieked. Doing something like this, ruining a celebration, someone ungrateful like you is a disgrace to our family. I was working all morning, I began. You called me saying the food was thrown away, didn't you? My mother-in-law replied, This daughter-in-law always looks down on me, and now she's trying to pin such a terrible crime on me. She cried out, playing the victim to the surrounding crowd. To my disadvantage, the relatives seemed to trust my mother-in-law, who had been in the family for over 20 years, more than me, who had only been part of the family for a few. I felt their condemning eyes on me again. Should I call the office then to prove I was working all morning? I said, determined to fight this out. If I did that, her lie would eventually be exposed. There's no need for that. Zoe was handling a task for me. It was last-minute work, but she graciously accepted it, said an unexpected voice. It was my father-in-law, with my husband standing behind him, relief on his face. I was worried he'd be too busy to respond, but my husband had successfully reached out to him. The trust as the head of the main family was evident. The gazes on me shed awkwardly, and suspicion began to gather on my mother-in-law. So, Zoe, my father-in-law continued, about that call earlier. Mother-in-law said she tasted the food, and it was so bad she threw it all away. She told me over the phone to remake it, I recounted. The room buzzed with my testimony, and then a sobbing sound rose above it. It was Savannah, the fiancé. I mostly cook Western food, but I worked hard on the Japanese dishes too, and they turned out delicious. Savannah sobbed, clinging to her fiancé. Yes, she was the one who had swapped tasks with me. She was the main character of this event, but she wanted everyone to taste her cooking as a surprise plan, so I agreed to help her. She had said to keep it a secret, but I never expected Savannah's dishes to be kept a secret even from my mother-in-law, the event coordinator. Savannah's cooking is terrible. That means my taste is in question too since I hired her for our Italian restaurant, my father-in-law mused. No, that's not it. I didn't mean that, my mother-in-law retorted in panic, but it was too late to deny it now. Savannah is a chef at my father-in-law's Italian restaurant. Even though it was Japanese cuisine, it was made by a professional. Moreover, the person in question had the endorsement of my father-in-law. Your tongue must have soured from all the snide remarks to your daughter-in-law, my father-in-law sighed with sarcasm. He looked at my mother-in-law, who clung to him, apologizing profusely. Aren't you apologizing to the wrong person? I couldn't hold back and continued, It's terrible to throw away Savannah's cooking no matter how bad you thought it was. My mother-in-law's face twisted in anger as she grabbed me by the collar. I thought it was your cooking, that a dish made by someone raised by a single parent would be tasteless and poor. So I kindly threw it away, my mother-in-law hissed. If I had known it was someone else's, I would have never done that. It's all your fault. You must have set me up for this, she ranted, spitting as she yelled. Amid her disgrace, my husband's aunt raised her voice with a frown. Knowing that I'm divorced, do you imply that being raised by a single parent is shameful? Our late grandmother also lost her mother when she was young. By your logic, it seems our family would be full of shameful people, she said, her gaze cold as if looking at a bug. No, that's not it. I didn't know, my mother-in-law protested. It doesn't matter. We've seen your true nature, my husband's aunt dismissed her. Shivering, my mother-in-law collapsed onto the cold floor of the kitchen. What a commotion, came a voice unexpectedly. I turned to see an old man in a wheelchair. It was my husband's grandfather, the current patriarch of the main family. I heard such a ruckus. I don't quite understand the situation, but throwing away food is unacceptable, he nodded gravely. The late grandmother used to share a story of receiving sweet potatoes from a field while evacuating. The sweetness momentarily took away the pain of losing her mother, he recalled, and silence enveloped the room. Food carries the emotions of the people who make it. Grandmother always said she was saved by the kindness of the cook. To waste food is to be less than human. We don't have such people in our family, do we? He directed the question at my father-in-law. Absolutely not, my father-in-law responded, and the patriarch left content with the answer. The patriarch's words are law, at least to everyone's eyes. The divorce my father-in-law decided for my mother-in-law seemed like the proper course of action. My mother-in-law, who had once boasted about being the wife of the future head of the main family, knew all too well the strength of the patriarch's authority. Understanding that no appeal would overturn his word, she had to go around apologizing to all the relatives, including those from broken families, not only for the disruption at the celebration, but also for the disrespect against food, which was particularly shameful for a family involved in the food business. She ended up kneeling and sobbing. Regarding the divorce settlement, after deducting compensation for ruining the celebration, It was agreed to give her a modest sum for her future setup. Cast out of the main house, she ended up in a small apartment meant for singles. Shunned by all relatives and without anyone to turn to, she began a lonely life. She never would have imagined that her petty jealousy and mistreatment of her daughter-in-law, leading to throwing away the food, would result in such a downfall. My mother-in-law had committed an act that a person should never do. She received the consequences of her actions. I'm Paisley, hitting the big 30 this year, and I've been with Joshua, my other half, since we were both too young to understand anything worthwhile. He's a catch, that's for sure. A hard worker, kind-hearted, and looks that don't hurt the eyes, if you get what I mean. The first time I walked into Joshua's mom's house, I remember thinking it was like walking into one of those TV shows where everything's for sale. There she was, Serenity, parked on her couch with a phone in one hand and a credit card in the other. She was chatting away with some customer service rep like they were old pals. Another set of fancy plates, Serenity? Joshua teased, nudging me as we walked in. You planning to open a restaurant or something? He added. Serenity flashed a grin, all teeth. Oh, Joshua, you can never have too many. What if the queen comes for tea? Serenity joked. She laughed, eyes never leaving the screen. I chuckled along, trying to find my place in this new scene. Nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Lewis, I managed, extending a hand, who got tangled up in the bracelets from her bargain shopping. Call me Serenity, dear, she said, eyes sizing me up like I was the next item on the home shopping network. So, you're the girl who's stolen my boy's heart. Sit, tell me everything, she suggested. And that was my introduction to the den where our bank account would take hit after hit because Serenity, as I'd come to find out, was more than just a spontaneous shopper. She was a black hole for cash. Her mania for shop-on-the-couch deals was just the tip of the iceberg. Joshua had told me stories about her parents leaving her a nice nest egg, but by the time he got in the picture, that egg had been cracked and scrambled on a slew of knickknacks and one-of-a-kind finds that filled every corner of her house. Sitting down for dinner that night, Joshua threw an arm around my shoulder, whispering, "Thanks for being cool about Mom. Well, you know." "Yeah, she's something all right," I said, smiling tight-lipped. It was only after we said our goodbyes that Joshua let out a sigh, heavy like he was carrying a boulder. "She's draining the inheritance faster than I thought," he admitted as we drove away. "I'm kind of worried," he added. Little did I know his worry would soon become our financial sinkhole. But that's a story for another chapter, isn't it? Things started getting real when Serenity came to us with her hands out, saying she was short on money. At first it was here and there, a few $100 to cover the electric bill or groceries. Joshua and I have been doing a pretty good job with it, so helping out didn't seem like a big deal. But soon it turned into a monthly ritual. It was a lazy Sunday morning when the topic first came up. Joshua was making pancakes, a little ritual of his own, when he said, "Babe, I think we should help Mom out with a regular thing, you know, just until she gets on her feet." "Regular like an allowance?" I asked, pausing with a mug halfway to my lips. "Yeah," Joshua replied, flipping a pancake, a little frown creasing his forehead. "She's just struggling," he uttered calmly. "The figure we landed on, $2,000 every month. I still remember the knot in my stomach when we agreed on that number. It wasn't that we couldn't afford it. It just felt like stepping onto a slippery slope. The first time we handed over the cash, Serenity had tears in her eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without you two," she said, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. "It's no problem, Serenity," I reassured her, trying to sound cheerful. "You'd do the same for us, right?" I asked. "Of course, darling. Family helps family," Serenity nodded, wiping her eyes. But then the next month rolled around, and the next. The envelope of cash was part of our budget, a line item that read, "Serenity's Lifeline." Joshua never said much about it, but I caught the worried looks he shot our bank statements after each donation to the cause. One night, after we'd handed over the latest installment, I found Joshua sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. "Everything okay?" I asked, flicking on the light. "Yeah, just thinking." "You know, we're doing a good thing, right?" Joshua said, his voice slow and thoughtful. "Yeah, I know. But does she have to spend it all on shopping?" I asked, concerned. Joshua rubbed a hand over his face. I don't know, I hope she's actually buying stuff she needs. Hope, I'd learned, wasn't the same as reality, and reality was about to give us a wake-up call. It didn't take long for the $2,000 to start feeling like chump change to Serenity. I could tell something was up when she stopped thanking us. The gratitude was replaced by expectations and soon, demands. One evening, Joshua's phone buzzed, and I saw him tense up before he even answered. Serenity's name flashed on the screen. Hey, Mom, what's up? Joshua's voice was wary, guarded. I only caught one side of the conversation, but that was enough. There was a pause, and then Joshua's face said it all. Furrowed brow, tight lips. Mom, we talked about this. No, I know, but Joshua said, trying to reason. Serenity must have cut him off because he went silent, just listening, his hand clenching around the phone. When he finally spoke again, his voice had that forced calm you use with kids throwing a fit. We can't do that right now. We've already given you the money for this month, he said. Another pause. Then Joshua's hand went to his forehead. It's not about not wanting to. It's just... Whatever Serenity said next made Joshua pull the phone away from his ear for a second. He took a deep breath, and when he put the phone back to his ear, his voice was firmer. Mom, stop. We can't. That's final. He ended the call, and the room was thick with tension. Joshua looked at me, his eyes apologetic. That was intense, I said, trying to break the silence. Joshua sighed and set his phone down with a kind of resignation. She wanted another 1,000, said she saw a set of designer curtains that would change her life. I snorted before I could help it. Curtains? Really? Joshua didn't smile. Says she said we weren't taking care of her, that we were just leaving her to her own devices. I reached over and took his hand. We're not, and you know it. She's using you. Joshua squeezed my hand, but his gaze drifted off, lost. I just don't know how to make her stop, he said in despair. The calls didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. Serenity started ringing at odd hours, sometimes even past midnight. It's as if she forgot about time and decorum. Once she called during a work meeting, and Joshua had to step out, his face a mask of embarrassment. The peak of it all was the day Serenity showed up unannounced, wailing outside our front door about how we were terrible children for not supporting her, for leaving her destitute. Our neighbors peered out their windows as Serenity's voice hit pitches I didn't know existed. We're not doing this here, Mom, Joshua said firmly, stepping outside, closing the door behind him to spare me the worst of it. I sat on our couch, hands over my ears, listening to the muffled sounds of a tantrum that should have been left behind in childhood. This was no longer about need. It was about want, and the wants were endless. Joshua knew it. I knew it. And deep down, I think even Serenity knew it. But knowing something's broken and fixing it are two different things. Joshua wasn't ready to fix it, not yet, and so the tantrums became another part of our routine, another thing to anticipate and dread, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only going to get worse. As the months dragged on, the weight of Serenity's demands started taking a toll on our marriage. Joshua had always been the kind of guy who could roll with the punches, but even he had limits. He was caught in the middle, wanting to please his mom and keep the peace at home. One quiet evening I found him in the garage, staring at an old photo of him and his mom. He didn't hear me come in. Hey, I said gently, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, a mix of sadness and frustration in his eyes. Hey, I was just thinking, he said. What about? I asked, leaning against the workbench, expecting him to show it to me. He put the photo down and rubbed his face. About all this stuff with my mom. It's like she's a different person, he said with sadness in his voice. I walked over to him. It's okay to say no to her, you know, I said gently. Joshua shook his head. You don't get it. She raised me by herself. She's all I have. But what about us, Joshua? What about what we need? I pleaded. I know, he said, the lines in his forehead deepening. It's just not easy. We stood there for a moment, the distance between us filled with unspoken words. Maybe we can talk to someone, get some advice, I suggested. He looked at me like a man drowning, grasping for a lifeline. Yeah, maybe. The conversation ended up becoming more of a psychological session, and Joshua strode confidently across the garage, phone in hand, looking for financial advisors, family therapists, anyone who could give us a roadmap through this mess. Paisley, she's my mom, but I feel like I'm paying for love, you know? Joshua confessed one night as we sat at the dinner table, not touching our food. I reached across the table and took his hand. I think she loves you in her way, but she's taking advantage of you. And that's not love, I argued. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then what if she ends up with nothing because I didn't help? The fear in his voice broke my heart a little. What if we end up with nothing because you helped too much? I asked. Joshua was trapped in his own head, fighting a battle where every choice seemed wrong, and I was trapped with him, watching the man I loved get twisted up inside, unsure of how to free himself from the ties that bound him so tightly to his mother. I knew then that something had to give. We couldn't go on like this. But for Joshua to see that, for him to really understand, it was going to take something big. Something that would shake him enough to break the hold Serenity had over him. I just didn't know what that something was yet. The final straw came when Serenity called to demand money for a luxury cruise. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, Joshua, she insisted over the speakerphone. Your dad would have wanted me to enjoy life, she kept urging. Joshua glanced at me, his face pale. Mom, we've got our own bills. We can't do this right now. But I'm your mother, Serenity's voice crackled with indignation. You owe me so much, she stated. Joshua's hand was shaking as he held the phone. It's not about owing, Mom. He didn't say enough. I couldn't take it anymore, I interjected, my voice surprisingly steady. Serenity, you can't keep doing this. It's not fair to Joshua, I added. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. And who are you to tell me what's fair? You just married into this family. I'm his mother. I felt Joshua's hand on my arm, but I shook it off. Being his mother doesn't give you the right to drain our finances, I said firmly. I see how it is. You've turned my son against me. Serenity was almost shouting. And if you two don't want to help me, maybe I should just talk to a lawyer about what I'm owed, she continued. We both stared at the phone in disbelief. You would sue your own son? Joshua's voice turned to a whisper. If I have to, Serenity shot back. I'll call you tomorrow. You better have a good answer, she finished. The call ended with a click, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Joshua looked at me, his eyes hollow. I can't believe she would go that far. I wrapped my arms around him, but there was a cold fear in the pit of my stomach. We need to stand our ground, Joshua, I said. He nodded slowly, wrapping his arms around me in return. Yeah, we do. That night we lay in bed wide awake, knowing that things couldn't go on like this. We had to confront Serenity, but the thought of it twisted my guts. She was family, but this was war. A war we never wanted to fight. I watched the sunrise, a routine that brought little comfort these days. Joshua was still asleep, the stress of the situation with his mom weighing on him even in his dreams. The idea came to me, a desperate thought that seemed to dance on the edge of sanity. What if Serenity believed we were no longer here? Not a permanent deception, just long enough to see her true colors. Over breakfast, I broached the subject with Joshua. What if Serenity thought we were gone? Not forever, just to see what she'd really do, I suggested. He nearly choked on his coffee. Gone as in dead? Exactly, I said. We can tell if her tears are real or just for show. He was silent, the fork halfway to his mouth. That's intense, he gave out after a short silence. I nodded, but necessary. After a moment of heavy silence, Joshua agreed. Let's do it. My mom was my rock and agreed to help us. In a trembling whisper, she said over the phone, Serenity, they had an accident. It's bad. They didn't make it. It wasn't long before Serenity showed up at our house. We huddled in our bedroom, straining to hear through the closed door. Footsteps, then Serenity's voice, callous and clear. So what's in it for me? They must have left something behind. I squeezed Joshua's hand so tightly it hurt, shock coursing through us at her blunt words. My mom's voice cracked, playing her part perfectly. Serenity, they just died. Is money all you're thinking about? She resented. Well, what else am I supposed to think about? Serenity retorted, a scoff hidden in her tone. I have to take care of myself. They were my support, and now what? We walked out of the bedroom and into the living room. Serenity's reaction was a mix of horror and disbelief. But the call! Joshua was a statue of cold resolve. "You're not getting anything from us, Serenity. Not now, not ever again," he said firmly, her face twisted, anger and shock warring for dominance. "You tricked me," she resented. "No," I corrected her, my voice surprisingly steady. "We just showed you the truth." Joshua opened the front door, his gesture a final goodbye. As we watched Serenity walk away, part of me mourned the loss of what should have been a family. But we hadn't really lost anything, had we? We'd only uncovered the painful truth that had been there all along. The next few days were eerily quiet. Joshua and I rarely spoke about Serenity, as if mentioning her might break the calm that had settled over the house. But we couldn't avoid the topic forever. We heard things through friends, little snippets of how Serenity was coping. Or rather, not coping. One evening as we sat on the couch with the TV murmuring in the background, Joshua broke the silence. "I heard Mom's selling the house." "Really?" I replied, keeping my eyes on the screen. He nodded. "Yeah, and everything she bought from those shopping sprees." I turned to look at him. "How do you feel about that?" He shrugged. Relieved, I guess, and sad, as if I didn't even know her. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging between us. Then a knock at the door. We exchanged a glance, neither of us expecting anyone. Joshua got up and I followed, hovering by the hallway as he opened the door. It was Serenity, looking kind of strange. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice void of its usual demand. Joshua hesitated but stepped aside. She walked in, not meeting our eyes. I got your mom's message," she started, fiddling with her purse. "We know," Joshua said flatly. "I've been selling stuff, trying to make ends meet without asking you for money," Serenity continued. Joshua crossed his arms. "Why are you telling us this?" Serenity looked up then, her eyes wet. "Because I was wrong," she took a breath, "and I'm sorry." It was the first time I'd ever heard those words from her. Joshua and I exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between us. "We appreciate the apology, Serenity," I said, "but things can't go back to how they were." "I know," she nodded, wiping her eyes, and with that, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Joshua and I returned to the couch, the TV still murmuring away. "Do you think she meant it?" I asked after a moment. "I don't know," Joshua replied, "but I hope so for her sake." We sat there, the room growing dark around us, contemplating the future and what it might bring. "It's funny how life has a way of settling down after a storm," Joshua said. Things with Serenity quieted down after she left our house that day. Joshua and we moved on with our lives, finding peace in the small daily routines that make up a life together. One evening after dinner we were cleaning up when Joshua's phone buzzed with a message from an old family friend, Callum. He hesitated for a moment before reading it out loud. "Serenity's sold off all her shopping channel hoard. House, too. She's in a rental now, over by the east side." I set down the plate I was wiping and looked at him. "How do you feel about that?" He took a deep breath, pondering. "Empty a bit, but also relieved." "Relieved," I echoed, not because I was surprised, but because I felt it too. "Yeah, she's making her own way, isn't she? Even if it's not what she's used to." He seemed to be trying to convince himself more than me. I nodded, leaning against the counter. "Did Callum say anything else?" Joshua scrolled through the message. "Just that she's telling everyone who will listen that we've abandoned her, that we're terrible for cutting her off." There was a sting to those words, a sting that might have hurt more once, but not now, not after everything. "We haven't abandoned her, Joshua. We set boundaries," I said firmly. He looked up, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "I know, and it's better this way for all of us." We went back to cleaning up, the house filled with the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other. Later that night, as we settled into bed, Joshua turned to me. "You know, I don't feel guilty." I found his hand under the covers and squeezed it. "You shouldn't. We did more than enough." "Yeah," he said softly, "we did." We turned off the lights, and in the darkness, I felt the last remnants of tension leave my body. Outside, the world went on, and inside, we had each other. That was enough. Whatever Serenity chose to do or say, it was on her now. We had each other, and we had peace, and that's all that really mattered. An unmarked white envelope addressed to me was the start of everything. I'm Willow, almost 60. I divorced my husband 15 years ago because of his affair. Since then, I've been living alone, but for the past year, I've been living with my second son and his girlfriend Sophia. My eldest son Eugene, now 35, lives in an apartment near his workplace. I was living a peaceful life, working part-time, until one day this envelope without a sender, crudely marked with my address and name, arrived. Inside was a bill from a hotel. "What's this?" I wondered aloud. Upon closer inspection, I found that the bill was not addressed to me, but to my eldest son Eugene, and it appeared to be a bill for the wedding and reception expenses. The date was about 2 weeks ago. What does this mean? Did Eugene get married? Indeed, Eugene had a girlfriend I met just once a few months ago, but at that time there was no talk of marriage. Frankly, I didn't have a great impression of the woman. Her name was Helen, I believe, and she barely made eye contact and kept saying and oh, as if displeased with something. Could it be that Eugene married her? I hurriedly called Eugene, but he didn't answer, possibly because he was at work. I tried to leave a message on the landline phone of the apartment where my son lives alone, and a woman answered. It was Helen. Upon realizing the call was from me, she said with annoyance, this is why I told Eugene to get rid of this landline. What does this mean? Did you two get married? Are you living together there? I bombarded her with questions. We got married. We're living together. So what? Helen responded in a robotic tone. So what? I received a bill from the hotel. I didn't hear a word about a wedding. I didn't hide my bewilderment. Oh, it arrived already? I sent that because I was hoping you would pay, Helen answered nonchalantly. We chose a venue where we could pay later. We paid the deposit, but we thought you should handle the rest, she added calmly. What? They had a wedding without even inviting me, and now they expect me to pay? I was utterly speechless. Helen, sounding irritated but clear, said, Eugene insisted on marrying me. I found the whole mother-in-law thing too bothersome and refused many times. So naturally, you should be the one to pay. If you refuse, do you realize Eugene will be buried in debt? She asked with a smirk. Hearing her cold voice snapped me back to reality. What does Eugene say about this? I asked. He says it's fine, of course. By the way, don't bother trying to contact him. I made sure your number is blocked, my daughter-in-law replied. So that's why I couldn't get through earlier. I might as well tell you now, other than for weddings, funerals, and such, please don't contact us at all. And even for those, we refuse anything that costs money, she continued. Wait, just wait a minute. Why are you avoiding me so much? I asked, bewildered. It's obvious, isn't it? A mother-in-law is nothing but a thorn in the eye. Besides, you're poor after your divorce, right? The daughter-in-law was bullying. We can't have you begging us for money. While I was panicking, I was also furious and retorted, if you think I'm so poor, why the heck are you sending me this bill? That's a separate issue. Please make sure to pay it. With that, Helen hung up abruptly. I stood there holding the receiver, completely stunned. Mom? It was my second son, Brett's voice that brought me back to my senses. It seemed hours had passed since that phone call, and I was standing in a dark room. Tears overflowed as I explained everything to Brett. He hadn't heard a word about the marriage from Eugene and was now fuming with anger. It's impossible. It seems his wife is a woman with a bad temper, isn't she? I thought she'd be a good match for my brother. I could hear the disappointment in his words. That's right, I began. Eugene, who was spoiled by my late mother-in-law, looked down on me since he was a child. By middle school, he was calling me old hag and worthless, and together with my mother-in-law and ex-husband, he kept on treating me horribly. Brett, you were the one who always stood up for me, I concluded. After my divorce, I had been living alone for a long time. Thinking I might be lonely, my kind son invited me to move in with him and his girlfriend, Sophia. What should I do with this bill? It's over $20,000. I could pay it with the alimony from my ex-husband, but I honestly don't want to use that money. I was thinking of saving it for your and Sophia's wedding or for when you have kids, I uttered in confusion. Both my second son and his girlfriend Sophia have always been very kind to me, so I had decided to use all the alimony and property settlement money, which my stingy ex-husband had saved up, for both of them. Then my son said, "That money is yours, Mom. You don't have to use it for us. And it's even more unthinkable to use it for my brother." He took the bill from me. I'll throw this away at work. Mom, you remember what my brother has done to you, right? You absolutely must not pay this, he said. Even if my eldest son was awful, I was the one who bore him. So if I had the bill, I would definitely end up paying it. Brett knew that. Honestly, I was relieved. 2 weeks later, Helen called me. Hey, why haven't you paid yet? The venue just called me because the payment deadline has passed, she demanded. I've discussed it with my second son and we've decided there's no need to pay. Besides, can't you handle it with the cash gifts from the wedding? I asked. I managed to say what I wanted to though. My heart was pounding. Then Helen flew into a rage. We've moved and we've already spent all the cash gifts. What are you going to do about this? She demanded. What? You moved? Where to? I asked, confused. Shut up. It doesn't matter, she snapped. This woman truly wants nothing to do with me. Realizing this, I made up my mind and said, all right, I'll make a counteroffer. I'll give you $10,000 and in exchange, we part ways. No contact, not even for weddings or funerals. We live our lives as if each other didn't exist. How about that? I asked. $10,000 is not enough. I need at least $20,000, Helen retorted. What are you thinking? Not inviting me to the wedding? Not telling me where you've moved to? And still asking for $20,000? I was freaking out. I don't care. You only have about 20 years left to live anyway. We're going to live twice as long as you, so I might as well want all your money, Helen stated. That's just cruel, I replied. Well, we're going to get that $20,000 from you one way or another. Once you pay, as per your wish, we'll cut ties with you, she offered. I didn't want anything to do with this woman anymore, so I agreed to her conditions. Brett would probably be pissed if he found out, but I didn't want to deal with Eugene and his wife anymore. A year later, Brett married Sophia. They were about to set up a new home, and though I was planning to live alone, they both asked me to live with them. So I gave them not only a wedding gift, but also prepaid 2 years' rent for their new place and some money to help with their mortgage. Then Helen called again. Eugene's brother and his wife are building a house, aren't they? You helped them, right? Because of you, Eugene is working 2 jobs and is exhausted since you only gave us a mere $20,000. She tried to rebuke me. It seems she heard about our new living situation somewhere. I was dumbfounded. But you agreed to that back then. I can't change it now, I replied. Shut up. We're having a baby. What are you going to do about that? She questioned. Oh, really? Congratulations. But remember, we agreed to cut all ties no matter what, so I'm not going to give you a penny, I added. No matter what she said, I had decided not to get involved anymore and stood my ground. You think you're so high and mighty. Even if your grandchild is born, I won't let you see them. You'll regret it. With that, Helen hung up. Apparently, she thinks that grandchild is the ultimate trump card to control a mother-in-law. I would love to have a grandchild, but I already have one. Actually twins, a boy and a girl. Sophia is 8 months pregnant. I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in Eugene's child at all. Half a year later, Sophia gave birth safely, and I was busily but happily caring for the twins. That's when I got an email with a photo from my eldest son, Eugene. It seemed that Helen had also given birth, and the photo showed a lovely baby with Helen and Eugene. But since we had already cut ties, it was none of my concern. As I continued to ignore it, Helen called me, seemingly out of nothingness. Did you see the picture? Isn't it incredibly cute? She asked. Yes it is. So what do you want? I replied. Don't talk like that. I went out of my way to show you your grandchild, and it's your eldest grandson. You could at least send a congratulatory gift, she demanded. What? I thought we agreed no contact except for weddings, funerals, and such, I resented. Well, yes, that was the agreement, but normally a parent would send a congratulatory gift or something, she added. I knew it would come to this. No, I'm sticking to the agreement with you, Helen, I firmly stated. With that said, Helen, seeming to realize it was futile, handed the phone to Eugene. That's the deal between you and Helen, right? It's got nothing to do with me. Send me the celebratory money, he demanded. It's your eldest grandson, you know. Don't you think you should take care of him? According to Eugene, how I treat their grandchild depends on how they will treat me in their old age. I really don't need you to worry about my old age, I answered. You think you can rely on Brett? With 2 kids of his own, do you really think he can take care of you in your old age? Eugene asked. I'm not planning to rely on Brett and his family, I said. So what are you going to do? I know you didn't get much from Dad's alimony. Wouldn't it be better to cozy up to us now? Eugene insisted. With an air of triumph, he said that. To him, I replied, like I said, I'll be fine. I've been paying into a personal pension insurance since I was single. It's an old policy, so the rates are good, and I get about $800 every month starting this year. Plus, I've worked long enough to get about $800 in government pension too. I can live on both combined, I finished. After hearing that, Eugene seemed to be in shock. There was silence for a while before he sputtered, But that will be just enough if nothing happens. When you get older and your body breaks down, you'll come crawling to us for help then. Laughing, I answered, Don't worry, I canceled the life insurance where you were the beneficiary. I had taken out life insurance policies for Eugene and Brett when they were born, with each of them as the beneficiary. I had canceled Eugene's to pay off that $20,000. There's plenty of money from the cancellation, so don't worry, I added. Cancellation? Are you serious? Eugene was dumbfounded. Pity, isn't it? If I hadn't canceled it, you would have gotten about $100,000 when I pass away, I uttered. No way, Eugene yelled. If you're going to blame someone, blame Helen. She's the one who told me to get $20,000 by any means necessary, I continued. Actually, the cancellation refund was only about $50,000, so I had about $30,000 left. Not as much as to shock Eugene, but there was no obligation to tell him the exact amount. Pleased with the silent shock on Eugene's end, I hung up the phone. Afterward, it turned Eugene and Helen had a huge fight. There's talk of divorce, but discussions about alimony and child support are at a stalemate, and they're in a state of living separately within the same house. It's like seeing the end of someone obsessed with money. As for me, I started working part-time as a cleaner to ensure I don't burden Brett and his family financially during my retirement. Warmly welcomed by my son and his wife and with 2 grandchildren, I am truly happy now. My name is Elise. I'm a homemaker. I married my husband Caleb after a workplace romance. Our marriage is going smoothly with no complaints, and we get along well every day. I often hear that after marriage, many people struggle with dealing with their spouse's relatives. I especially hear stories about the difficulties of dealing with sisters-in-law. But I got along very well with Caleb's sister Judith, and we often went shopping and traveling. I have a sister of my own, but I don't get along well with Elodie, and often thought it would be nice if Judith was my real sister. Then one year, Judith passed away due to illness. The day I received the news of her death, I was so sad that I couldn't eat, and my tears didn't stop until the day of the funeral. On the day of the funeral, my husband, who had gone to the funeral home before me, suddenly called me. Do not show up to the funeral. Run to your parents' house. I'll explain the situation later, he said harshly. I arrived at my parents' home, not understanding why I couldn't go to the funeral of my sister-in-law, with whom I had been so close. What's the matter? Isn't Judith's funeral today? My parents asked, surprised by my sudden return. With a sad face, I revealed what Caleb had told me. Oh, I see. We just got a call from someone claiming to be Caleb's relative. He complained that you were a horrible person and even threatened to set our house on fire if we don't pay damages. We had no idea what he were talking about, so we thought it was a scam or harassment. There might be something going on. Let's wait to hear from Caleb, my father said. Just then, Caleb, dressed in his morning suit, rushed to our house in his car. Bowing deeply, he said, I'm sorry for the unforgivable act committed by my relatives. It seems they haven't arrived here yet, but just in case, let's go to the police. I couldn't comprehend my husband right away, who was gasping for air, so I decided to calm him down and ask for details. What happened, Caleb? Why can't I go to the funeral? I asked. Judith's suicide note was full of accusations against you, he said, his face pale. No way, it's true, I exclaimed, shocked. It says things like Elise told me to die and she was violent towards me, and it asked for revenge. The relatives who took it seriously are trying to extort you with an outrageous amount of damages. This place is also dangerous because they know where it is. Let's go to the police right now, he confessed. I collapsed in shock by the front door, but was able to regain my composure with my mother's support. My sister-in-law said that about me? That's impossible. I've racked my brains, but I have absolutely no memory of doing anything like that. Caleb comforted me. rubbing my shoulder saying, "Calm down, it's okay, it's all lies. Maybe it's my mom who dislikes you and rewrote everything. Your sister-in-law always seemed happy talking about you as if you were her real sister. It can't be true," he reassured me. But I wondered if it was really that easy to fabricate or change the text in a note. Even I, with my average knowledge of law, understand that if I were to tamper with such personal documents, I'd be immediately held accountable. "Anyway, because they've called, those relatives may be heading here," Caleb urged. Rushed by Caleb, I left my parents' house. Arriving at the police station, I immediately submitted a recording of the abusive phone call that had been left at my parents' house and a video from my smartphone showing relatives becoming irate when my mother-in-law dramatically read out a suspicious message at the funeral home. The police said that since there was no actual harm yet, they would increase patrols in the neighborhood and wait. Realizing that prior consultation with the police will be beneficial if something happens in the future, I felt a little relieved. But as soon as I returned to my parents' house, something happened that blew away my relief. As my husband was parking the car and getting out, there was some commotion at the front door. Approaching cautiously, I saw a stranger, a middle-aged man and woman shouting, "It's your fault that my sister..." My sister's cheek was red from being slapped. My father's beloved golf club was squashed on the ground, and fragments of broken vases and ornaments were scattered about. Presumably, my husband's relatives had stormed to my parents' house while we were consulting with the police. "Uncle, Aunt, my wife hasn't done anything. I'm calling the police on you for hurting my wife's sister," Caleb shouted, enraged. His words made his uncle and aunt flinch for a second. "Wait, a sister?" They seemed to realize that I, standing next to Caleb, was the real Elise, and that the one they had harmed was my sister. But without any signs of remorse, they approached me again with the golf club in hand. "You used a double, you sneaky woman. Based on the text in the note, how dare you abuse our beloved little Judith? It's because of you that she suffered mentally and her illness progressed," they accused. However, my father, hearing the commotion from the violence towards my sister and the sounds of things breaking, rushed over and grabbed my uncle's hand, shouting, "A phone call wasn't enough for you, and now you dare raise your hand to my oldest daughter." I had never seen my father, who normally was gentle-looking, so terrifying. It made me shudder. My uncle and aunt-in-law seemed unsatisfied and argued with my father for a while, but eventually the police arrived and took them away in their police car for questioning. "Elise, are you okay?" my father asked. I was dazed by all that had happened, but my father's words brought me back to reality. "I'm sorry, sister, for getting you hurt because of me," I said, rushing to my injured sister to apologize. My dad, whose energy had vanished just as quickly as it came, was asking my mom to bring an ice pack, looking crestfallen as he said, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, especially with your wedding coming up." He tried to ice my sister's cheek with it. My sister grabbed the ice pack from him and, cooling her cheek herself, said, "It's not your fault. You're quiet and an introvert, but you're a decent person and got along well with my deceased sister-in-law. This is physical damage, right? I can sue that uncle and aunt, so I made some money," my sister, always so calm, said like a cucumber. But maybe she's just pretending to be calm for my sake. I thought, feeling grateful and seeing how she stood by me after I got married. Believing in me despite the false accusations made me feel truly reassured. That's why I couldn't forgive my violent uncle and aunt, who caused my sister pain, nor myself who had let her get hurt in the first place. That night, Caleb said to me, "I'll go get evidence. Stay here. Let me know if anything happens," and left me to go to his parents' house. I was anxious while he was gone, but apparently word got around about my uncle and aunt-in-law's unreasonable violence among the relatives, and no one came to my parents' house after that. Later, we arranged a meeting. My parents, my sister, my husband, and in-laws, and several relatives, including my uncle and aunt-in-law, gathered at my husband's parents' house. It was a somewhat large house. My uncle and aunt seemed to have reconsidered their views on the situation a bit, but were still under the delusion that they were right, demanding an apology with absurd logic. "If you admit to the bullying written in the suicide note, we'll let you off the hook, so we'd like you not to file a report either," my uncle-in-law insisted. Just then, my sister, who had been quiet, spoke up. "Oh, what did you say?" she asked. When my uncle-in-law glared at her with a sour face, she said, "If you give me $30,000, I will give up on filing a report. I can't concentrate on my work because you hit me so hard. Hand over $30,000 to cover everything, including the golf club and things you broke." She said it rather nonchalantly, not looking away from her smartphone. My uncle's face turned bright red, and he started to yell, "What? You're making a ridiculous claim just because you got punched once? You're brazen. You sisters are the same." In the end, he lashed out at my parents, saying, "Don't you feel pathetic as parents for raising such shameless sisters?" My mother, while calm, responded resolutely, "With all due respect, both sisters are adults. They are expressing their opinions as capable individuals, not as children. Isn't it only natural to respond to rudeness with rudeness? I can't imagine the fear, pain, and indignation of being suddenly punched. Anyway, isn't a suicide note more serious than what happened to me?" my sister asked, this time while yawning. She was seemingly uninterested in the squabbling over her situation. Yes, the cause of all this was the possible tampering with the suicide note, which led my uncle and aunt-in-law and other relatives of my husband to take outrageous actions. "So does that mean you did it, Mom?" My husband turned to his mother and pressed her. My mother-in-law, who had been fidgeting, flinched very obviously. "Well, I'm getting senile and my memory is a bit fuzzy." She tried to gloss over the situation with a simpering tone. Ignoring her, my husband spread out a piece of paper. This was my sister's real suicide note. My mother had written in her diary of the place she hid it, and I found it. She forged a fake note full of lies that made it seem like my wife bullied my sister, and she read it aloud to our relatives, making them believe it. "Who's the fool here?" my husband said, suppressing his anger and sounding genuinely disappointed. "Mom, you wrote terrible things in your diary, wishing my sister's illness on my wife instead. I can't consider you my mother anymore." With a cold gaze, my husband glared at his own mother. Before his eyes, my mother-in-law eventually became quiet and finally broke into tears. My father-in-law, who had been quietly listening, said, "It's my fault for not realizing what kind of person my wife is. Son, you don't have to deal with this family or these relatives anymore. You go live far and happily. I'll keep an eye on my wife and make sure she doesn't see you guys again. That's the least I can do to make amends," he concluded. My husband nodded at these words and turned to his aunt and uncle, who had been silent. "Please pay the $30,000 you were offered earlier. Otherwise, we will gather all the evidence and actually file a police report." "I'd prefer that, but it seems that's not what you want," my husband suggested. The aunt and uncle trembled, glaring at my sister. To give $30,000 to such a bratty girl? They wondered. "Yay! I can buy a V-brand bag and a C-brand golf club set." "Lucky me," my sister grinned with a triumphant expression on her face. I didn't like her bad personality, but this time there was more to her happiness. My father had his golf clubs broken, my mother's vase of flowers was broken, and I was involved in unreasonable trouble. She seemed to deliberately speak too intemperately, so that the three of us would feel relieved. Ignoring all of this, my mother-in-law clung to my husband's leg and cried, "You're the only one left for me, my dear son." But my husband's heart no longer opened up to her. "Then why didn't you care about my sister at all? Her suicide note was switched with a fake one, wasn't it?" "No, it's not like that. Just listen to me," she pleaded. "Enough already. How low can you go?" My father-in-law attacked his wife, who still tried to push her own story. I'm done with this. Let's go, everyone. We'll talk about the money later. Goodbye," my sister pronounced, standing up quickly, looking down at my mother-in-law. She walked past the bewildered relatives and confidently and gracefully headed towards the entrance. My parents followed her. My husband took my hand and led me out of the house. I still remember the complicated smile on his face when he said, "Even though she's like that now, she used to be a normal mom. When we came home from school, she'd greet us and give us snacks. It's a little sad that we won't be coming back to this house anymore." A week later, I slowly began to come to my senses and decided to ask my husband about the actual suicide note. "I was actually waiting until you were smiling again," he encouraged, and put a real note in front of me. "I adore you, Elise. I have a hard time with my illness, often in and out of the hospital. I feel that my mother's interest in me is not as strong as her affection for my brother. My father's affection was always apparent, but you, Elise, being a girl too and close in age, were my true confidant. Because you are my emotional support, I can keep living no matter how hard it gets. That's something I feel every day. My parents have a considerable fortune, so I want you and Caleb to inherit all of my estate. If it goes to my mother, she would just blow through it quickly. I know my father would understand. I hope it can contribute to your happiness. I couldn't help but hug her suicide note and cry. Go ahead and cry your heart out today, my husband said as he put his arms around my shoulder to calm me down. From that day on, I decided to smile and live my life for my sister-in-law. I will carefully save her inheritance until the day I really need it. Later, my sister settled matters with my husband's aunt and uncle for $30,000. She immediately bought things and sent them a list of the items in a letter titled, "A Thank You Note for the $30,000. It's a very Elodie-like approach, but maybe that's not enough to clear the grudge from the pain of being punched in earnest. As a side note, my relationship with my sister improved a little after this incident, and she started inviting me to go out for meals together. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law became emotionally unstable and aged rapidly. Her paranoia got worse, and she mistook a stranger for me, yelling, "It's your fault Caleb left," which led to police involvement. Though she was a first-time offender, and her mental state was taken into consideration, resulting in a suspended sentence, she became widely known as a dangerous person. My father-in-law, true to his promise, did not abandon her and continued to take care of her without letting her come to our place. My husband and I, having cut ties with his relatives, are now living a peaceful life. Looking back, it was a seriously terrifying experience. I feel sorry for my father-in-law, who didn't know anything about it, but I still can't forgive my mother-in-law for trampling on her own daughter's feelings. My husband and I will slowly walk along this long road ahead of us together, for my sister-in-law, who longed for our happiness.